She went to the wedding alone, and the stranger who asked her to dance was her new Millionaire CEO. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. The crystal chandeliers cast golden shadows across the ballroom as Ava Collins adjusted the strap of her emerald silk dress. At 29, she had learned to carry herself with quiet confidence, shoulders back, chin up, a gentle smile that masked years of putting her heart on hold. "You came alone again, didn't you?" Her best friend Jasmine appeared beside her, radiant in her wedding dress, but wearing that familiar look of concern. "And I'm perfectly fine with that," Ava replied, smoothing her natural curls that she'd styled into an elegant updo. Her rich mahogany skin glowed under the warm lighting, and for the first time in months she felt beautiful. Not just professional beautiful or put-together beautiful, but genuinely radiant. "Ava, you've been saying that for 2 years now. Ever since David." Ava's voice was steady, but her fingers unconsciously twisted the thin gold bracelet on her wrist. "And I meant it. I'm here to celebrate you, not to find my next mistake." The live jazz quartet began playing a slow, sultry melody that seemed to wrap around the room like velvet. Couples drifted onto the dance floor, lost in their own worlds of whispered promises and gentle touches. Ava found herself watching them with a mixture of longing and resignation. When had she become the woman who stood at the edges of happiness, looking in but never stepping forward? "Dance with me," the voice came from behind her, deep, warm, with just a hint of amusement. She turned to find a man she'd never seen before, though something about him felt strangely familiar. He was tall, easily 6'2", with dark blonde hair that caught the light and the kind of blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, but it was the way he carried himself that caught her attention, confident without being arrogant, powerful without being intimidating. "I'm sorry?" Ava blinked, certain she'd misheard. "You've been standing here for 10 minutes watching everyone else dance. I figured you might be waiting for someone to ask." His smile was crooked, genuine, completely disarming. "I'm Walter." "Ava." She found herself smiling back before she could stop herself. "And I wasn't waiting for anyone. I was just thinking too much." The accuracy of his observation made her laugh, a real laugh, not the polite chuckle she'd perfected for networking events. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because you've got that look." Walter stepped closer, extending his hand. "The same look I had before I decided to walk over here instead of standing by the bar all night, overthinking every reason why I shouldn't." Ava looked down at his outstretched hand. Strong fingers, no wedding ring, a small scar across his knuckles that spoke of a life lived outside boardrooms and conference calls. When was the last time someone had surprised her? When was the last time she'd felt that flutter of possibility? "I should warn you," she said, placing her hand in his. "I might step on your feet. It's been a while since I've danced with anyone who wasn't my reflection in the mirror. Good thing I wore my steel-toed dress shoes." The warmth of his palm against hers sent an unexpected jolt through her system as he led her onto the dance floor. He moved with the kind of natural grace that suggested he was comfortable in his own skin, a quality that had become increasingly rare in her world of carefully constructed personas. "So," Walter said as they began to sway to the music, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, "what brings a woman who practices dancing alone to a wedding?" "The bride is my best friend since college." "What about you?" "Friend of the groom. Business associate, actually. Though I'm starting to think I owe him a very expensive thank you gift." The way he said it, with that subtle smile playing at the corners of his mouth, made Ava's pulse quicken. When had someone last looked at her like that, like she was the most interesting person in the room? "Careful," she murmured, allowing him to spin her gently before pulling her back into his arms. "Compliments like that might go to my head." "Maybe that's exactly what I'm hoping for." They moved together as if they'd been dancing for years, not minutes. Ava found herself relaxing into the rhythm, into the unexpected comfort of being held by someone who didn't know her professional reputation or her romantic failures. To Walter, she was simply Ava, a woman in an emerald dress who laughed at his jokes and fit perfectly in his arms. "You know what's strange?" she said, as the song began to wind down. "What's that?" "I came here tonight telling myself I was perfectly content being alone, and for the first time in 2 years I actually believed it." Walter's thumb traced a small circle against her back, a gesture so intimate and unconscious that it made her breath catch. "And now I'm remembering why I used to love dancing." The final notes of the song faded away, but neither of them moved to separate. Around them, other couples shifted and changed partners, but in their small bubble of space, time seemed suspended. Ava. Her name sounded different when he said it, softer, like a secret he was sharing just with her. Yes? But before Walter could finish his thought, the bandleader's voice crackled through the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could have all the guests gather around for the bouquet toss. The spell broke. Reality rushed back in with all its noise and expectations. Ava stepped back, suddenly aware of the dozens of people around them, of the fact that she was breathless and probably blushing, and definitely more affected by one dance than she had any right to be. She gestured vaguely toward the crowd gathering around Jasmine. Of course. Walter's smile was understanding, but she caught a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. Maybe I'll see you around. Maybe, Ava agreed, though something in her chest tightened at the casualness of the word. As she walked away, joining the laughing group of single women positioning themselves for the bouquet toss, she couldn't resist one glance back. Walter was still standing where she'd left him, hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The bouquet sailed through the air in a perfect arc. Ava didn't even try to catch it. She was too busy wondering if she'd just walked away from something that could have changed everything. But as the evening wound down and she gathered her purse to leave, she realized Walter had vanished as mysteriously as he'd appeared. No goodbye, no phone number, no promises to call. Maybe it was better that way, she told herself as she waited for her Uber. One perfect dance, one perfect moment, preserved in amber before reality could tarnish it. She had no way of knowing that in 12 hours, reality would find her anyway, and it would be wearing Walter's face. Tomorrow would bring a surprise that would turn her carefully ordered world upside down. But would she have the courage to let it? You're glowing. Ava looked up from her laptop to find her colleague Mia perched on the edge of her desk, coffee in hand, and a knowing smirk on her face. The morning San Francisco fog pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of TechFlow Communications, but for once, Ava barely noticed the grey outside. It's called concealer and a good night's sleep, Ava replied, though she couldn't quite suppress the smile tugging at her lips. The truth was, she had slept better last night than she had in months. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still feel Walter's hand on her back, still hear the way her name sounded when he said it. Uh-huh. Mia wasn't buying it. This wouldn't have anything to do with the mysterious man you danced with at Jasmine's wedding, would it? Heat crept up Ava's neck. She'd made the mistake of texting Mia a single message last night, had the most amazing dance with a stranger, still floating. Now she was regretting her moment of weakness. It was just a dance, Mia. A dance that left you checking your phone every 5 minutes yesterday, hoping he'd somehow magically gotten your number. Mia leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Did you at least get his last name? Before Ava could answer, the conference room door opened, and their director, James Morrison, stepped out with his usual Monday morning stress face. Team meeting in 5 minutes. The new CEO wants to address everyone before the quarterly review. Ava's stomach dropped. She'd completely forgotten about the CEO transition. Their previous leader had retired suddenly 6 weeks ago, and the board had been secretive about his replacement. All they knew was that he was coming from outside the company and had an impressive track record in tech innovation. Great, Mia groaned. Another corporate shark who'll probably want to optimize our synergies and leverage our core competencies. Ava laughed despite her nerves. You've been watching too many business comedies, or living through too many corporate takeovers. Mia slid off the desk and gathered her things. Come on, let's go meet our new overlord. The conference room buzzed with nervous energy as the 40-person team filed in. Ava chose a seat in the middle, not too eager in the front, not too disinterested in the back. She pulled out her notebook and tried to focus on the agenda James was distributing, but her mind kept drifting to Walter. Had he thought about their dance as much as she had? Was he somewhere in the city right now, going about his Monday morning routine, carrying the same sweet ache of unfinished possibility? Settle down, everyone. James tapped his pen against his coffee mug. I know you're all curious about our new leadership, so I'll keep this brief. Our new CEO comes to us with 15 years of experience in tech communication and strategic development. He's worked with everyone from startups to Fortune 500 companies, and the board is confident he's exactly what we need to take TechFlow to the next level. Ava found herself only half listening, her fingers unconsciously smoothing the pencil skirt she'd chosen that morning. She'd dressed more carefully than usual, telling herself it was just good professional practice, definitely not because she was still feeling beautiful from the way Walter had looked at her. Without further delay, James continued, "I'd like you all to meet Walter Koch." The name hit Ava like a physical blow. Her pen slipped from her fingers, clattering against the conference table as every head in the room turned toward the door. And there he was. Walter, her Walter, the man who had made her laugh and held her like she was something precious, walked into the room with the quiet confidence she remembered. But now, instead of a perfectly tailored suit for a wedding, he wore a navy blazer and crisp white shirt that somehow made his blue eyes even more striking. His hair was styled more formally, but she could still see the slight wave that had caught the light on the dance floor. Their eyes met across the room and time stopped. She watched his professional smile falter for just a heartbeat, saw the flash of recognition, and something else, something that looked like relief mixed with panic, cross his features. Then his composure slammed back into place so quickly she almost wondered if she'd imagined it. Almost. "Thank you, James." Walter's voice was exactly as she remembered, warm, assured, with that hint of amusement that had drawn her in. But now there was a professional edge to it that made her stomach flip. "I'm excited to be here and to get to know each of you." He moved to the front of the room with fluid grace, and Ava realized with growing horror that he was scanning the faces in front of him. When his gaze found hers again, she saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "I believe in direct communication and collaborative leadership," Walter continued, his eyes now carefully focused somewhere over everyone's heads. "I'm not here to disrupt what's working, but to build on the strong foundation you've already created." Mia leaned over and whispered, "He's actually pretty hot for a CEO. Did you see the way he—" "Ava? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ava couldn't respond. Her entire world had tilted off its axis, and she was struggling to keep breathing normally. This couldn't be happening. The universe couldn't be this cruel or this ironic. "I'll be scheduling individual meetings with department heads over the next few weeks," Walter was saying, "and I encourage all of you to feel free to reach out if you have questions or concerns." His eyes found hers one more time, and this time they held for a long moment. She saw something flicker there, uncertainty perhaps, or maybe the same bewilderment she was feeling. "Are there any questions before we adjourn?" A few hands went up around the room, but Ava barely heard the questions or Walter's responses. Her mind was spinning with implications. Her mystery man, her perfect stranger, was now her boss. The man whose touch had made her feel alive again was completely, utterly off limits. "All right then," Walter concluded. "I look forward to working with all of you. Ava Collins, could I see you in my office in 15 minutes? I'd like to discuss the Morrison account transition." The sound of her name in his voice, the same voice that had asked her to dance, sent a shiver down her spine. Around her, people were gathering their things and filing out, but she remained frozen in her chair. "Ava!" Mia was staring at her with concern. "Did you hear that? The new CEO wants to see you." "I heard." Ava's voice sounded strange to her own ears. "That's good, right? You're the best account manager we have. He probably just wants to get up to speed on your projects. If only it were that simple." As the conference room emptied, Ava finally forced herself to stand on unsteady legs. Through the glass walls, she could see Walter in the corner office that was now his, standing with his back to the room, looking out at the city skyline. 15 minutes. She had 15 minutes to figure out how to face the man who had turned her world upside down twice in less than 24 hours. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. "Still thinking about your mystery man? Any chance you'll see him again?" Ava stared at the message and almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. See him again? She was about to spend the next few years working directly under him. She looked up to find Walter's office empty, but a shadow fell across her desk. When she turned, he was standing there, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same subtle scent that had surrounded her on the dance floor. "Ms. Collins." His voice was carefully neutral, but she caught the slight tremor underneath. "My office." Now, what would they say to each other now that the magic of anonymity was gone? And how long could they pretend that Saturday night had never happened? The walk to Walter's office felt like the longest 30 seconds of Ava's life. Her heels clicked against the polished concrete floors with a rhythm that matched her racing heartbeat. She could feel curious eyes following her, Mia's concerned stare, the subtle glances from colleagues who were probably wondering why the new CEO had singled her out so quickly. Walter's office was a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the San Francisco Bay. Normally, Ava would have been impressed by the sleek modern furniture and the way the morning light streamed across the glass desk, but right now, All she could focus on was the man standing behind that desk, his back still turned to her. She knocked on the already open door, her knuckles barely making a sound against the glass. "Come in. Close the door." His voice was steady, professional, but she heard the undercurrent of tension. Ava stepped inside and pushed the door shut with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Walter turned slowly, and for the first time since the conference room, they were truly looking at each other. No audience, no professional masks to hide behind, just the two of them, and the memory of Saturday night hanging between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. "Sit down, please." He gestured to one of the leather chairs facing his desk, then seemed to think better of the formal setup. Instead, he moved to the small seating area by the windows, 2 chairs and a coffee table that somehow felt less intimidating than the massive desk. Ava chose the chair facing away from the windows, partly because the light was better, and partly because she needed something solid at her back. Walter took the opposite chair, close enough that if they both leaned forward, their knees might touch. The silence stretched between them, loaded with everything they couldn't say. Ava found herself cataloguing details she'd missed Saturday night. The way his fingers drummed once against his thigh when he was thinking, the small scar along his jawline that spoke of childhood adventures, the way his eyes weren't just blue, but had tiny flecks of grey that made them look like storm clouds. "This is—" Walter started, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. The gesture messed up his perfectly styled look and made him seem more human, more like the man who had asked her to dance. "Complicated?" Ava supplied, proud that her voice came out steadier than she felt. "That's one word for it." A ghost of a smile crossed his lips, the same crooked smile that had disarmed her completely 2 nights ago. "I have to ask, did you know? When you saw my name this morning, did you know it was you?" Ava shook her head. "Your last name is Koch. You told me, Walter, but I mean, how could I have known?" Relief flickered across his features. "Good. I was hoping this wasn't some elaborate setup." "Setup?" The word came out sharper than she intended. "You think I orchestrated this somehow? That I researched the new CEO and then— What? Hunted you down at my best friend's wedding?" "No, Walter held up his hands and she noticed they were trembling slightly. "I'm sorry. I'm not handling this well. I've been awake since 4 a.m. trying to figure out what I was going to say to you." The admission caught her off guard. He'd been thinking about this conversation as much as she had, lying awake and planning words that now seemed inadequate in the face of reality. "What we need to discuss," Walter continued, his voice taking on a more formal tone, "is how we move forward professionally. You're one of the senior account managers here, and according to your file, you've been instrumental in several major client relationships." "My file?" Ava blinked. "You've been reading my personnel file?" A flush crept up Walter's neck. "I've been reading everyone's files. It's standard when taking over a new company. It wasn't about Saturday night." But the way he said it, the slight hesitation, made her wonder if that was entirely true. Had he seen her name on the employee roster and felt the same jolt of recognition she was feeling now? Ava. Her name sounded different when he said it here, in this sterile office space, but it still made her pulse quicken. What happened Saturday night was a mistake, she finished quietly. Something flashed in his eyes, hurt maybe, or disappointment. "Is that what you think? Isn't it?" She forced herself to meet his gaze directly. "You're my boss now, Walter. Whatever that was between us, whatever we felt, it can't happen again. Can't it?" The question hung in the air between them, dangerous and full of possibility. Ava felt her resolve wavering as she looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't just attractive in the conventional sense. There was something in the way he carried himself, a quiet strength mixed with unexpected vulnerability, that drew her in despite every logical reason to run. "There are rules," she said, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. "HR policies, professional boundaries." "I know." Walter leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, bringing him closer to her. "Believe me, I know. I've spent the last 2 hours reviewing the employee handbook, looking for clauses about personal relationships. And it's not explicitly forbidden, but it's strongly discouraged. Any romantic relationship between supervisors and direct reports has to be disclosed to HR immediately, and there are protocols." "Romantic relationship?" Ava's heart hammered against her ribs. "We had one dance, Walter. We barely know each other, don't we?" The softness in his voice made her look up, and she found him watching her with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "In 3 minutes on that dance floor, I learned more about you than I have about most people I've known for years. The way you laugh when you're surprised, how you bite your lip when you're thinking, the fact that you're incredibly kind but don't think you deserve kindness in return. You can't possibly know all that from one dance. Can't I? Walter's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Tell me I'm wrong, Ava. Tell me you didn't feel it too. That connection, that sense of recognition. Like we'd been looking for each other without even knowing it. Ava's breath caught. Because he wasn't wrong. She had felt all of that and more. But feeling something and acting on it were two very different things. It doesn't matter what I felt, she said finally. It matters what's right, and this, whatever this is, it's not right, it's not fair to either of us, or to everyone else who works here. Walter sat back in his chair and she could see him rebuilding his professional walls in real time. You're right, of course. I apologize for bringing my personal feelings into the workplace. The formality in his tone stung more than she expected. Walter, it's Mr. Coke in the office, he said gently but firmly. We both need to remember that. Ava nodded, swallowing around the sudden tightness in her throat. Of course. Mr. Coke. Good. He stood, moving back behind his desk and picking up a folder. The message was clear. This personal conversation was over. Now, about the Morrison account. I'd like you to brief me on the current status and any potential issues we should be addressing. For the next 20 minutes, they discussed budgets and timelines and client communications with perfect professionalism. Ava answered his questions thoroughly, made notes about his concerns, and maintained exactly the right tone of respectful efficiency. But underneath it all, she was acutely aware of every small movement he made, every inflection in his voice, every moment when his eyes lingered on her face just a fraction too long. When the meeting finally ended, she gathered her papers and stood to leave. Ava. Walter's voice stopped her at the door, and when she turned back, his carefully maintained composure had slipped just enough for her to see the man from Saturday night underneath. For what it's worth, that dance was the best 3 minutes I've had in a very long time. Before she could respond, his phone rang, and he answered it with a brisk, "Coke here," effectively dismissing her. Ava walked back to her desk on unsteady legs, hyper-aware of the curious looks from her colleagues. Mia immediately appeared at her side. Well, how did it go? You look like you've seen a ghost. Again. Ava sank into her chair and stared at her computer screen, seeing nothing. It was fine, just work stuff, but as she tried to focus on her emails, she couldn't stop thinking about Walter's last words, or the way he'd looked at her when he said them, like she was something precious he'd found and lost in the same breath. A few weeks. That's how long Ava had been pretending that Walter Coke was just her boss and nothing more. A few weeks of carefully modulated good mornings, professional emails that she rewrote 17 times to make sure they struck exactly the right tone, and meetings where she sat precisely 2 chairs away from him to avoid catching his cologne. It was working about as well as trying to ignore a fire by pretending the smoke didn't exist. You're doing that thing again, Mia observed, sliding a vanilla latte across Ava's desk. They'd started a routine of grabbing coffee from the little cafe downstairs every Wednesday morning, and Mia had apparently appointed herself as Ava's unofficial therapist during these sessions. What thing? Ava minimized the email she'd been staring at for the past 10 minutes, a perfectly innocuous message from Walter about quarterly projections that had somehow made her palms sweat. That thing where you look like you're trying to solve world hunger through sheer concentration? Mia perched on the edge of the desk, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. You've been weird ever since the new CEO started. And don't tell me it's just adjustment stress, because I've seen you handle way more challenging transitions. Ava took a sip of her latte, buying herself time. The truth was, she'd been existing in a state of constant low-level panic for weeks. Every unexpected email notification made her heart race. Every time Walter walked past her desk, which he seemed to do with suspicious frequency, she found herself hyper-aware of every breath, every movement, every inadvertent glance. He's just intense, she said finally, which wasn't technically a lie. Walter was intense, though not in the way Mia was probably imagining. Intense how? Like micromanager intense? Or like smoldering CEO romance novel intense? Ava nearly choked on her coffee. Mia, what? I'm just saying the man is objectively gorgeous and single, according to Linda in accounting, who apparently did some very thorough social media stalking. Mia waggled her eyebrows. Plus, I've seen the way he looks at you during team meetings. He looks at everyone during team meetings. That's what good leaders do. Uh-huh. And does he look at everyone else like he's trying to memorize their face? Before Ava could formulate a response that wouldn't give everything away, her computer chimed with a calendar notification. Her stomach dropped as she read it. Meeting with Mr. Coke, conference room B, 2 p.m. Speak of the devil, Mia murmured, reading over her shoulder. What's that about? Probably the Henderson proposal. Ava was already mentally preparing herself for another hour of sitting across from Walter, pretending her pulse didn't quicken every time he said her name. Nothing exciting. But when 2 o'clock arrived and Ava walked into conference room B, she found something that definitely wasn't about the Henderson proposal. Walter was there, yes, but so was an elaborate setup that made her breath catch. The usual conference table had been pushed aside, and in its place was a smaller round table set for two, complete with white linens, actual china, and what appeared to be lunch from Chez Laurent, the French restaurant 6 blocks away that she'd mentioned loving during one of their forced professional conversations. "What is this?" she asked, though her traitorous heart was already answering with a flutter of dangerous hope. Walter stood from where he'd been adjusting one of the place settings, and she caught a glimpse of nervousness in his expression before his professional mask slipped back into place. "A working lunch. I thought we could discuss the Henderson proposal in a more relaxed environment. In a conference room with china. The regular dining room was booked." His voice was steady, but she noticed the way his fingers drummed against his thigh, the tell she'd learned to recognize during their previous meetings. "I hope you don't mind. I took the liberty of ordering your usual from Chez Laurent." The fact that he knew her usual made something warm and terrifying unfurl in her chest. "How do you know my usual?" I asked Mia. Walter moved to pull out her chair, a gesture so naturally courteous that she found herself sitting before she could think better of it. She's very forthcoming with information when she thinks it's for a good cause. Ava's eyes widened. "You didn't tell her that we'd met before?" Walter took his own seat across from her, close enough that she could see the grey flecks in his blue eyes. "No. I simply mentioned that I wanted to show appreciation for your hard work on the Henderson account and asked for restaurant recommendations." Relief and disappointment warred in her chest. "That was thoughtful. I have my moments." The smile that accompanied his words was soft, genuine, nothing like the polished CEO expression he wore in team meetings. For a moment, he looked exactly like the man who had asked her to dance 3 weeks ago, and Ava felt her carefully constructed defenses wobble. Walter served the food with an efficiency that suggested he'd done this before. Coq au vin for her, something that looked like duck confit for himself. The familiar aromas filled the small space, making it feel less like a sterile conference room and more like an intimate restaurant. "The Henderson proposal," Ava said, determinedly focusing on business as she cut into her chicken. "I've reviewed their requirements, and I think we can deliver everything they're asking for within budget, but the timeline might be challenging." "Ava," Walter's voice was gentle but firm, "it's just us. You don't have to recite talking points." "I'm not," but she stopped, because she absolutely was. 3 weeks of careful professionalism had turned into armor she wasn't sure how to remove even when she wanted to. "You are, and I understand why." Walter set down his fork and leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "These past few weeks have been difficult for both of us. They've been fine, professional, appropriate. They've been torture." The blunt honesty of his words hit her like a physical blow. She looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made it hard to remember why they couldn't do this, why she couldn't just reach across the table and touch his hand. "Walter, I know all the reasons why this is complicated, why it's inadvisable, why we should both just pretend that Saturday night never happened and move on with our lives." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to that intimate tone she remembered from the dance floor. "But I can't stop thinking about you, Ava, and unless I'm completely misreading every signal you've given me for the past 3 weeks, you can't stop thinking about me either." Her fork clattered against her plate. "That's not... We can't what? Be honest about what we're feeling? Can't act on it?" The words came out more forcefully than she intended, and she lowered her voice, acutely aware that they were still in a public space. "Walter, you're my boss. There are policies, procedures. If anyone found out what? That 2 adults shared a meal and a conversation? You know it's more than that, do I?" Walter's smile was challenging, playful in a way that reminded her exactly why she'd been drawn to him in the first place. "Because from where I'm sitting, all I see is a hard-working employee and her supervisor discussing quarterly projections over a perfectly innocent lunch." Ava stared at him, torn between exasperation and an unexpected urge to laugh. "You're impossible. I'm persistent. There's a difference." "Is there? Ask me in a few months." The casual assumption that they'd still be having this conversation, this dance around each other, in a few months, made something flutter in Ava's stomach. "Walter, just eat your lunch, Ava. Let yourself enjoy something good for once." So she did. And despite every logical reason she could list for why this was a terrible idea, despite the professional boundaries they were gleefully tap-dancing across, despite the fact that anyone could walk past the conference room and see them through the glass walls, despite all of it, Ava found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. They talked about everything except work. Walter told her about growing up in Portland, about the grandmother who taught him to cook, and the college photography class that almost made him change career paths entirely. Ava found herself sharing stories about her family in Atlanta, about her sister's wedding next month and her mother's inability to understand why she'd moved so far from home. It felt natural, easy, like the continuation of a conversation they'd started on a dance floor and been forced to pause for 3 agonizing weeks. When Walter walked her back to her desk afterward, his hand briefly touched the small of her back. Just for a moment, just as they passed through the doorway, anyone watching would have seen nothing more than a polite gesture from a considerate boss. But Ava felt that touch for the rest of the afternoon, a warm reminder of all the reasons why she was in so much trouble. "How was your meeting?" Mia asked the moment Walter was out of earshot. "Fine, productive." Ava sat down at her desk and tried to look busy, though she was pretty sure her cheeks were still flushed. "Uh-huh. And that's why you look like you just won the lottery and got struck by lightning at the same time." Ava looked up to find Mia watching her with knowing eyes, and she realized with a sinking heart that her carefully maintained facade was crumbling faster than she could rebuild it. "Mia, honey," Mia's voice was gentle, concerned. "What's really going on? Spill. Now." Mia had dragged Ava to the rooftop terrace of their building, a small garden space that most employees forgot existed. At 5:30 on a Wednesday evening, they had it to themselves, nothing but the San Francisco skyline and the lingering scent of jasmine from the planters scattered around the space. Ava sank onto one of the benches and buried her face in her hands. The weight of 3 weeks of pretending, of careful smiles and professional distance, of lying awake at night replaying every word Walter had said to her, all of it came crashing down at once. "Can't do this anymore," she whispered. Mia sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Can't do what? Your job? Because, honey, you've been doing incredible work lately. A little distracted, maybe, but I can't keep pretending I don't have feelings for him." The words hung in the evening air between them. Ava had never said it out loud before, not even to herself, and hearing it made everything feel terrifyingly real. Mia was quiet for a long moment. Walter Koch. It wasn't a question, but Ava nodded anyway. "I know how it sounds. I know how it looks. The classic cliché, employee falls for the attractive new boss. But it's not like that, Mia. Or, it's not just like that. Tell me." So Ava did. The whole story spilled out of her like water through a broken dam. The wedding, the dance, the way Walter had looked at her like she was the only person in the room. The shock of seeing him in the conference room. The impossible chemistry that hadn't dimmed despite 3 weeks of trying to suffocate it. "He had lunch brought in today," Ava finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "Real China, my favorite restaurant, flowers on the table. And he sat there telling me about his grandmother and asking about my family like we were on an actual date, not discussing quarterly projections." Mia let out a low whistle. "Damn, girl, he's got it bad." "That's not the point." "That's exactly the point." Mia turned to face her fully. "Ava, in the 2 years I've known you, I have never seen you light up the way you do when you talk about this man. Not even with David, and you dated him for 8 months." The comparison to David hit unexpectedly hard. Ava had thought she was in love with David. Successful, handsome, stable David, who checked all the right boxes and had never once made her pulse race the way Walter did with a simple good morning. David was safe, Ava said quietly. This is terrifying. Love usually is." "I didn't say anything about love." Mia gave her a look that suggested she wasn't buying that deflection for a second. "Honey, you just spent 20 minutes describing a man like he hung the moon and invented chocolate. If that's not love, it's definitely the opening act." Ava's stomach fluttered at the word. Love. Was that what this was? this constant awareness of Walter's presence. This way her whole day seemed to hinge on whether or not they'd have reason to interact. The way she'd started choosing her outfits based on which colors made her skin glow, just in case she ran into him in the hallway. "It doesn't matter what I feel," she said finally. "He's my boss, Mia. There are policies. And beyond that, there's the practical reality that if this went wrong, when it goes wrong, I'd have to find a new job, start over somewhere else, and I love working here." "Do you love working here more than you could love him?" The question hit like a physical blow, because the truth was, Ava was starting to suspect she could love Walter more than she'd ever loved anything in her life. The intensity of what she felt after just a few hours of actual conversation was unlike anything she'd experienced before. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared of how much I want this, how much I want him. I've never felt anything like this before, and I don't know how to handle it." Mia reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently. "Can I give you some advice? As your friend, not as your colleague." Ava nodded. "Stop trying to handle it. Stop trying to control it, or analyze it, or make it fit into neat little professional categories." Mia's voice was gentle, but firm. "Sometimes, the best things in life are the ones that scare us the most. And from what you've told me, this man isn't just attracted to you. He's willing to risk his own professional reputation to spend time with you. That says something about how he feels. Or it says something about how reckless he is. Maybe both." Mia smiled. "But Ava, you've been playing it safe your whole life. Safe job, safe apartment, safe relationship with David. When was the last time you took a real risk on something that mattered?" Before Ava could answer, her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number, but somehow she knew who it was before she even opened it. "I know I shouldn't be texting you, but I can't stop thinking about our conversation today. Would you like to get coffee tomorrow morning? Somewhere away from the office?" Ava's heart hammered against her ribs as she stared at the screen. Coffee. Away from the office. It was such a simple request, but they both knew it would be crossing a line they'd been carefully dancing around for weeks. "Who is it?" Mia asked, though her knowing smile suggested she already suspected. Ava showed her the message, and Mia's grin widened. "Oh, he's smooth. I'll give him that." "I can't. This is exactly what I was just saying. What you were just saying is that you're scared. But being scared isn't the same as being wrong." Mia stood, brushing off her skirt. "You know what I think? I think you should text him back and say yes, and then you should wear that blue dress that makes your eyes look incredible, and see what happens when you stop fighting this thing." "Mia, I'm serious, Ava. You're 29 years old. You're brilliant and beautiful and kind, and a man who could probably have any woman in the city is practically begging you to have coffee with him. Stop overthinking it, and just live a little." After Mia left, Ava sat alone on the rooftop as the sun began to set over the bay. The city spread out below her, millions of lights beginning to twinkle as evening approached. Somewhere out there, Walter was probably wondering if she'd respond to his text, probably second-guessing himself the way she was second-guessing everything. She looked down at her phone again, at his message still glowing on the screen. Such simple words, but she could read so much between the lines. The confession that he'd been thinking about their lunch, the admission that he knew he was breaking protocol by reaching out, the vulnerable hope hidden in that question mark. Before she could lose her nerve, she typed back, "Yes, I'd like that very much." She hit send before she could change her mind, then immediately wanted to throw her phone off the roof. What was she doing? This was career suicide. This was emotional suicide. This was... Her phone buzzed again. "Tomorrow at 8 a.m.? There's a little place called Café Luna on Market Street, far enough from the office that we won't run into anyone we know." The fact that he'd already thought about the location, about keeping their meeting private, sent a warm shiver through her. He was protecting both of them, even as he was asking her to take this risk with him. "See you there," she typed back. As she rode the elevator down to the parking garage, Ava caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with something that looked dangerously like excitement. For the first time in weeks, she felt like herself again, not the careful, professional version she'd been performing, but the real Ava. The woman who used to take chances, who used to believe in possibility. Maybe Mia was right. Maybe it was time to stop fighting this and see where it led. Tomorrow morning she'd find out if Walter Koch was worth risking everything for. Somehow she already suspected he was. Ava changed her outfit 3 times before settling on the blue dress Mia had mentioned, a soft wrap style that hugged her curves without being too obvious about it. She'd spent an extra 10 minutes on her makeup, telling herself it was just good grooming. not because she wanted Walter to look at her the way he had during their dance. Café Luna turned out to be a cozy little place, tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop, the kind of neighborhood gem that felt like a secret. Exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and the rich aroma of freshly roasted coffee beans created an atmosphere that was intimate without being romantic. Safe, neutral ground. Walter was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of him. He'd traded his usual business attire for dark jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes look impossibly blue. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that had nothing professional about it. "You came," he said, standing to pull out her chair. "You sound surprised." "Hopeful," he corrected, settling back into his seat. "I thought you might change your mind overnight." Ava wrapped her hands around the coffee cup he'd ordered for her, a vanilla latte somehow perfect, despite the fact that she'd never told him her preference. "I almost did, about 17 times between my apartment and here. What changed your mind?" She looked up to find him watching her with genuine curiosity, no trace of the CEO mask he wore at the office. Here, in the morning light streaming through the cafe windows, he looked younger, more relaxed, more like the man who had asked her to dance. A very persistent friend who thinks I overthink everything. Smart friend. She has her moments. Ava took a sip of her latte, buying herself time to study his face. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. Why did you take the job at TechFlow?" Walter leaned back in his chair, clearly not expecting that question. "That's a loaded question for 8 in the morning. I'm curious. You could work anywhere. Big corporations, startups, consulting firms. Why a mid-sized communications company in San Francisco?" For a moment, she thought he might deflect, give her the polished answer he probably used in board meetings. Instead, he ran a hand through his hair, that nervous gesture she'd learned to recognize, and gave her something real. "Honestly, I was burned out. I'd spent 5 years at a Fortune 500 company, climbing the ladder, checking all the right boxes, and I was miserable." He paused, seeming to consider how much to reveal. "I had everything I thought I wanted. Corner office, 6-figure salary, respect from my peers. But I'd go home every night to an empty apartment and wonder what the hell I was doing with my life." The raw honesty in his voice caught her off guard. "So you left?" "I left. Took 3 months off, traveled a little, tried to figure out what actually mattered to me." Walter's smile was self-deprecating. "TechFlow appealed to me because it's big enough to make a real impact, but small enough that I can still know everyone's name. Plus, I liked the company culture, the focus on innovation without sacrificing humanity. And now I go home every night thinking about a woman I met at a wedding who challenges me to be better than I thought I could be." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable, and completely devastating. Ava felt her carefully constructed defenses crumble a little more. "Walter, I know this is complicated, Ava. I know there are 100 reasons why we shouldn't be sitting here right now." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to that intimate tone she remembered from the dance floor. "But I need you to know that what I'm feeling isn't just attraction or convenience or some kind of power trip. When I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be human." Ava's breath caught. "That's a lot of pressure to put on one person." "Is it? Or is it just honesty?" She studied his face, looking for any sign of manipulation or calculation, but all she saw was sincerity, mixed with the kind of vulnerability that couldn't be faked. "Tell me about your family," she said suddenly. Walter blinked at the subject change. "My family? You mentioned your grandmother yesterday. I want to know about the people who made you who you are." So he told her about growing up in Portland with parents who were both teachers, about the grandmother who lived with them and taught him that cooking was an act of love, about the younger sister who was now a social worker in Seattle and called him every Sunday to make sure he was eating vegetables. "She'd like you," Walter said. "Sophie has very strong opinions about the kind of woman I should be dating, and you check every box on her impossible list." "What's on the list?" "Smart, kind, independent, beautiful, capable of calling me on my bullshit." He ticked off each item on his fingers, his eyes never leaving her face. "Someone who makes me want to be a better man." Heat crept up Ava's neck. "You don't even know me." "Don't I?" Walter reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin. "I know you take your coffee with vanilla because you think life's too short for bitter things. I know you bite your lip when you're thinking hard about something. I know you have a laugh that could light up a room, but you don't use it nearly enough. Walter, I know you're scared of taking risks because someone hurt you badly enough that you'd rather be safe than happy. His voice was gentle, understanding. "And I know that despite all of that, you're here with me, which means you're braver than you give yourself credit for." Ava stared at him, shaken by how clearly he saw her. David had known her for 8 months and had never understood her half as well as Walter seemed to after a few conversations. "Your turn," Walter said, settling back in his chair. "Tell me something real." "Like what?" "Like why you moved to San Francisco. Like what you dream about when you're not busy being perfect at everything. Like what scares you besides taking chances on handsome CEOs." The teasing tone made her smile despite herself. "Handsome, huh? Devastatingly so. It's a burden I've learned to bear." Ava laughed, the real laugh he'd been talking about, and felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. "You're ridiculous. I'm charming. There's a difference." "Is there? Ask me in a few months." The echo of his words from yesterday made her pulse quicken. There it was again, that casual assumption of a future together, as if he couldn't imagine a world where this didn't lead somewhere beautiful. "I moved here because I wanted to reinvent myself," Ava heard herself saying. "In Atlanta, I was always Ava Collins, Dr. Collins's daughter, the good girl who never caused trouble. Here, I could just be me, whoever that turned out to be." "And who did you turn out to be?" "I'm still figuring that out." She met his eyes across the table. "But I think I might be the kind of person who takes chances after all." Walter's smile was slow, warm, full of promise. "I really hope so." They talked until the cafe began to fill with the morning rush crowd, covering everything from favorite books to travel dreams to the way the light looked different in San Francisco than anywhere else they'd lived. By the time Walter walked her to her car, Ava felt like she'd been talking to an old friend, if old friends made your heart race and your skin tingle with awareness. "Thank you," Walter said, as they stood beside her Honda Civic, suddenly formal again. "For what?" "For saying yes. For trusting me enough to be here." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "For making me remember what it feels like to want something more than just success." Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her cheek, a soft, brief touch that somehow felt more intimate than a full kiss might have. When he pulled back, his eyes were serious. "I should let you get to work," he said. "We both have meetings this morning." Ava nodded, not trusting her voice. The spot where his lips had touched her cheek felt warm, electric. "Ava?" Walter's voice stopped her as she reached for her car door. "This doesn't have to be complicated. Not if we don't let it be." As she drove to the office, Ava caught herself smiling in the rearview mirror. For the first time in weeks, the future felt full of possibility instead of problems. Maybe Walter was right. Maybe this didn't have to be complicated. Maybe sometimes the best things in life were actually the simplest ones. Two people who couldn't stop thinking about each other, finally brave enough to see what happened next. But as any woman who's ever fallen for her boss knows, nothing in love is ever as simple as it seems. The Henderson client presentation was supposed to be routine. Ava had done dozens of these before, polished slides, confident delivery, happy clients walking away with signed contracts. What she hadn't counted on was Daniel Henderson himself, showing up with wandering hands and alcohol on his breath at 10 in the morning. "Ms. Collins?" Henderson leaned too close as she set up her laptop, his hand brushing against her lower back in a way that made her skin crawl. "I have to say, when I requested the best account manager, I didn't expect someone quite so appealing." Ava stepped sideways, putting the conference table between them. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Shall we begin with the campaign overview?" But Henderson wasn't interested in campaign overviews. For the next hour, he made increasingly inappropriate comments disguised as compliments, interrupted her presentation to ask personal questions, and somehow found reasons to move closer to her, despite her obvious discomfort. By the time the meeting ended, without a signed contract, Ava's professional smile felt like it might crack her face in half. "Think about what we discussed," Henderson said as he gathered his things, his eyes lingering on her in a way that made her want to shower. "All of it." The moment the conference room door closed behind him, Ava sank into her chair and buried her face in her hands. She was shaking, with anger, with disgust, with the horrible helplessness of being in a situation where she couldn't call out bad behavior without potentially losing a major client. "Ava?" Walter's voice came from the doorway, and when she looked up, his expression went from mild concern to fury in the space of a heartbeat. "What happened?" "Nothing, it's fine. The meeting just didn't go as planned." But Walter was already moving into the room, closing the door behind him. "Henderson, what did he do?" The quiet intensity in his voice was somehow more frightening than if he'd been shouting. Ava had never seen this side of him, the controlled anger that made him look every inch the powerful CEO he was. "Walter, it's not—" "Tell me what he did, Ava." Something in his tone told her there was no point in deflecting. Inappropriate comments. Unwanted touching. Nothing I haven't dealt with before, unfortunately. Walter's jaw clenched so hard she could see the muscle jumping. "Did he hurt you?" "No. He's just handsy, and clearly thinks his money gives him the right to be." Ava stood, smoothing down her skirt with hands that were still trembling slightly. "I can handle it." "You shouldn't have to." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made something warm unfurl in her chest, even as her rational mind told her this was exactly the kind of complication they needed to avoid. "Walter, we can't afford to lose the Henderson account." "Yes, we can." His voice was flat, final. "We absolutely can afford to lose any client who thinks harassing our employees is acceptable behavior. It's a 7-figure contract. I don't care if it's a 10-figure contract." Walter moved closer, and she could see the storm brewing in his blue eyes. "No amount of money is worth you being made to feel unsafe or uncomfortable, not ever." The absolute certainty in his voice, the way he said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, made Ava's throat tight with unexpected emotion. When had anyone ever protected her like this? Made her feel like her comfort and safety mattered more than the bottom line. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. "I'm going to call Henderson and terminate our business relationship. Effective immediately." "Walter, you can't. The board will ask questions." "Let them ask." Walter's smile was sharp, dangerous. "I'll tell them exactly what I told you, that we don't work with clients who can't treat our employees with basic human decency." He was already reaching for his phone, and Ava realized with a mixture of terror and admiration that he was completely serious. He was going to tank a 7-figure deal to protect her. Professional consequences be damned. "Wait." She caught his arm, and the contact sent a familiar jolt through her system. "There might be another way." Walter paused, his attention fully focused on her. "I'm listening. What if we restructure the account? Assign it to someone else? Maybe Marcus from the development team. Henderson specifically requested to work with me, but if you make it clear that's not an option, you think he'll still sign?" "I think his company needs what we're offering more than he needs to harass me personally." Ava met his eyes. "And this way, we keep the contract and maintain professional boundaries. Everyone wins." Walter considered this for a long moment. "And if he refuses? If he insists on working with you specifically? Then we walk away." The words surprised her even as she said them. A year ago, she would have gritted her teeth and endured Henderson's behavior for the sake of the contract. But something about Walter's fierce protectiveness had shifted her perspective. "Some things are more important than money." "Yes," Walter said quietly, "they are." The way he was looking at her made it hard to breathe. They were standing close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, could smell the subtle cologne that had haunted her dreams for weeks. The afternoon light streaming through the conference room windows caught the angles of his face, and for a moment, all she could think about was how much she wanted to kiss him. "Ava." Her name was barely a whisper. "We can't." But even as she said it, she wasn't stepping back. If anything, the space between them seemed to be shrinking. "I know." Walter's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with devastating gentleness. "But I need you to know that what happened today, it changes things for me." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I can't pretend anymore that this is just about attraction or chemistry or whatever we've been calling it." His voice was rough, honest. "Seeing you upset, knowing someone made you feel small or afraid, it made me realize that somewhere along the way, I stopped being able to imagine my life without you in it." Ava's breath caught. "Walter, I know the timing is terrible. I know this complicates everything, but I need you to know that what I feel for you isn't going away. It's only getting stronger." Before she could respond, before she could think of all the reasons why this was impossible, Walter's phone rang, shattering the moment. He stepped back with visible reluctance, glancing at the screen. "It's the board chair," he said apologetically. "I have to take this." "Of course." Walter paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "This conversation isn't over, Ava." After he left, Ava remained in the conference room, touching her cheek where his hand had been. Her reflection in the window showed flushed cheeks and bright eyes, the look of a woman who was falling fast and hard for a man she couldn't have, except maybe she could have him. Maybe Walter was right, and this didn't have to be as complicated as she was making it. Maybe sometimes the heart knew things the mind was too scared to acknowledge. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mia. "Lunch in 10. You look like you need to debrief." Ava smiled despite everything. Trust Mia to know exactly when she needed a friend. Yes, and you're going to need a strong coffee for this story. As she gathered her things, Ava caught herself thinking about what Walter had said, that he couldn't imagine his life without her in it. The scary part wasn't that he'd said it, it was that she was starting to feel the same way. Maybe it was time to stop fighting this and start figuring out how to make it work. Because the alternative, pretending she didn't feel this connection, this pull toward him, was starting to feel like the bigger risk. When did protecting her heart become less important than protecting this feeling between them? "You look like someone who just made a life-changing decision." Mia was right, as usual. They were sitting in their favorite corner booth at Rosa's Cafe, 2 blocks from the office, where the lighting was dim enough for serious conversations and the pasta was good enough to cure most emotional crises. "Maybe I have," Ava said, twirling linguine around her fork without really eating it. She'd been replaying the scene in the conference room for the past 3 hours. Walter's hand on her cheek, the intensity in his voice when he said he couldn't imagine his life without her. Spill. Everything. Starting with why you looked like you'd seen a ghost when you came out of that meeting with Henderson. So Ava told her about Henderson's wandering hands and inappropriate comments, about Walter's fierce protectiveness, about the way he'd been willing to sacrifice a 7-figure contract without a second thought. "Damn," Mia breathed when she finished. "That man has it bad for you. That's what scares me." "Why? Because he's willing to put your safety and comfort before money? Because he looked at you like you hung the moon? Honey, those are features, not bugs." Ava set down her fork and leaned back in the booth. "Because I think I'm falling in love with him, Mia. Actually genuinely head over heels in love, and I don't know what to do with that. Have you considered telling him?" "Tell him what? That I spend half my day thinking about the way he says my name? That I've started choosing my outfits based on what colors bring out my eyes because I hope he'll notice that when he touched my face today, I forgot every reason why we can't be together?" Mia's smile was soft, understanding. "Those all sound like pretty good reasons to take a chance on him. Or pretty good reasons to transfer to the Portland office before I do something really stupid." "Ava," Mia reached across the table and covered her hand. "Can I tell you something? In the 2 years I've known you, I have never seen you this happy. Even when you're scared, even when you're overthinking everything, there's this light in your eyes that wasn't there before. Don't run from that. What if it all goes wrong? What if we try this and it ruins everything, my job, my career, my ability to trust my own judgment? What if it all goes right?" The simple question hit Ava like a lightning bolt. She'd been so focused on all the ways this could end badly that she'd barely allowed herself to imagine what it might look like if it worked. Walter picking her up for real dates, not secret coffee meetings. Falling asleep in his arms without worrying about who might see them together. Building something beautiful and lasting with a man who looked at her like she was magic. "I'm terrified," Ava admitted. "Good. The best things in life should terrify you a little." When Ava got back to the office, there was a single white rose on her desk with a note written in Walter's careful handwriting. "Thank you for trusting me today and for reminding me what's really important." She was still staring at the note when her phone buzzed with a text. "Dinner tonight? My place. I'll cook. No business talk, no professional boundaries. Just us." Ava's heart hammered against her ribs as she read the message. This was it, the moment where she either took the leap or spent the rest of her life wondering what might have been. Before she could lose her nerve, she typed back, "What time? 7. I'll text you the address. And Ava, wear something comfortable. Tonight is about us getting to know each other without the rest of the world watching." At exactly 7 o'clock, Ava stood outside a charming Victorian house in No Valley, clutching a bottle of wine and trying to calm her racing heart. She'd changed clothes 4 times before settling on dark jeans and a soft cashmere sweater in deep burgundy, dressed up enough to show effort, casual enough to suggest she was comfortable being herself around him. Walter answered the door in jeans and a simple grey t-shirt that somehow made him look more attractive than any of his perfectly tailored suits. His hair was slightly mussed, and there was a smudge of flour on his cheek that made her want to reach up and brush it away. "Hi," he said, and his smile was so warm and genuine that some of her nervousness melted away. "Hi yourself." She held up the wine. "I brought reinforcements." "Perfect. I'm going to need them if this dinner turns out the way my practice run did last night." The admission that he'd been nervous enough to practice cooking for her was so endearing that Ava found herself laughing. "That bad?" Let's just say my smoke detector and I are on very intimate terms now. Walter's house was warm and inviting, with exposed brick walls and hardwood floors that gleamed in the soft lamplight. The living room was furnished with well-loved leather chairs and bookshelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. Jazz music played softly from hidden speakers, and the whole space felt like a sanctuary from the corporate world they both inhabited during the day. "This is beautiful," Ava said, running her fingers along the spine of a well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. "Thanks. It took me 2 years to make it feel like home instead of just a place to sleep." Walter appeared beside her with 2 glasses of wine. "I wanted somewhere that felt real, you know, after years of sterile apartments that looked like hotel rooms." They ended up in the kitchen while Walter put the finishing touches on dinner: salmon with lemon and herbs, roasted vegetables, and what appeared to be homemade bread. Ava perched on a bar stool at the island, watching him move around the space with easy confidence. "Your grandmother would be proud," she said, remembering their conversation about cooking being an act of love. "She'd like you," Walter said, glancing up from the vegetables he was plating. "She always said I'd know the right woman by whether or not she could make me want to cook for her. And do I?" Walter set down his utensils and looked at her directly. "Ava, you make me want to do a lot of things I've never wanted to do before." The intensity in his voice made heat pool in her stomach. "Like what?" "Like risk my career for a chance to be with you. Like spend my entire day thinking of excuses to walk past your desk. Like plan elaborate dinner parties just so I can watch you laugh." He moved around the island until he was standing in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne. "Like fall completely. Utterly in love with someone I met exactly 1 month ago." Ava's breath caught. "Walter, I know it's fast. I know it's crazy. But I can't pretend anymore that this is just attraction or infatuation or whatever safe word we want to use." His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "I'm in love with you, Ava Collins. Completely, hopelessly, and I needed you to know." For a moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the soft jazz playing in the background and the rapid beating of her own heart. Walter's eyes searched her face, vulnerable in a way that made her chest ache. "Say something," he whispered. "Please." Instead of words, Ava stood up and kissed him. It was nothing like the careful, professional distance they'd maintained for weeks. This was months of tension and longing and carefully controlled desire finally finding release. Walter's arms came around her immediately, pulling her closer as she threaded her fingers through his hair. He kissed like he did everything else, with complete focus and devastating thoroughness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ava rested her forehead against his. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "I've been trying not to for weeks, but I love you too." Walter's smile was brilliant, transformative. "Really? Really? Even though you're my boss and this is probably the most professionally irresponsible thing I've ever done, and I have no idea how we're going to make this work." Walter silenced her with another kiss, this one soft and sweet and full of promise. "We'll figure it out," he murmured. "Together, we'll figure all of it out." As they sat down to dinner, Ava felt something shift inside her, a settling, like a piece of herself she hadn't even realized was missing, clicking into place. For the first time in her adult life, she was exactly where she belonged. They talked until nearly midnight about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing as naturally as it had that morning at the cafe. When Walter walked her to her car, he kissed her goodnight with a tenderness that made her toes curl in her shoes. "Tomorrow," he said against her lips, "we start figuring out how to do this right." "Tomorrow," Ava agreed, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them together. Love had found them despite every logical reason it shouldn't have. Now came the hard part, making it last. 3 weeks of stolen moments, 3 weeks of careful professional facades during the day and breathless phone calls at night. 3 weeks of the most intense happiness Ava had ever experienced, shadowed by the constant fear of discovery. "You're glowing again," Mia observed, settling into her usual spot on Ava's desk with her morning coffee. "And don't tell me it's a new skincare routine, because I've seen you use the same face wash for 2 years. Ava tried to focus on her computer screen, but she could feel Mia's knowing stare burning into the side of her head. "I've been sleeping better." "Uh-huh. And that has nothing to do with the fact that you've been leaving work exactly at 5:30 every day, or that you keep checking your phone and smiling like you have a secret." Before Ava could deflect with another weak excuse, her email chimed with a message from Walter. "Conference room C in 10 minutes. Need to discuss the Morrison quarterly review." Her pulse quickened, as it always did when she saw his name in her inbox. The Morrison Quarterly Review had been completed 2 weeks ago. "I have to go," Ava said, gathering her files with hands that trembled slightly. "Meeting? With the boss?" Mia's voice was casual, but her eyes were sharp. "You've been having a lot of meetings with him lately. He's very hands-on with account management." "I bet he is." Conference Room C was their room now, tucked away at the end of the hall, with frosted glass that made it impossible to see inside clearly. Walter was already there when she arrived, standing by the windows in a charcoal suit that made his eyes look storm grey. The moment she closed the door behind her, his professional mask slipped, and she saw the man who had held her until dawn, just 2 nights ago, who whispered her name like a prayer when he thought she was sleeping. "I missed you," he said simply, and the honesty in his voice made her heart flutter. "It's been 3 hours since I saw you in the team meeting." 3 hours too long. Walter moved toward her with that fluid grace she'd grown to love, stopping just close enough that she could smell his cologne. "How are we supposed to maintain professional distance when all I want to do is kiss you senseless?" "We manage, like we have been." But even as she said it, Ava found herself leaning into his space, drawn by the magnetic pull that hadn't diminished even slightly since that first night at his house. "I have something for you." Walter reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made Ava's heart stop completely. "Walter, what?" "It's not what you think," he said quickly, reading the panic in her expression. "Though someday, but that's not what this is." Inside the box was a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant, a tiny compass rose that caught the light beautifully. "So you never lose your way," Walter said softly, lifting the necklace from the box. "And so you always know that no matter where life takes us, you'll always have a piece of my heart pointing you home." Ava's throat tightened with emotion. "It's beautiful. Turn around." She did, lifting her hair so he could fasten the clasp at the back of her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin as he worked, sending familiar shivers down her spine. When she turned back to face him, his eyes were dark with the same desire she felt, building in her own chest. "Ava." Her name was rough, wanting. "We can't, not here." "I know." But he was moving closer anyway, his hands coming up to frame her face. "I know we can't, but God, I want to." The space between them disappeared. Walter's lips found hers in a kiss that was desperate, hungry, full of 3 weeks of stolen moments and careful restraint finally breaking free. Ava melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with everything she'd been holding in during endless professional meetings and polite hallway conversations. They broke apart only when the need for air became critical, both breathing hard. Walter rested his forehead against hers, his thumb tracing circles on her cheek. "We should stop," Ava whispered, but she made no move to step away. "We should," Walter agreed, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "We definitely should." Neither of them moved. The sharp knock on the conference room door made them spring apart like teenagers caught by parents. Ava quickly moved to the opposite side of the room, grabbing files from the table and trying to look like she'd been reviewing documents instead of kissing her boss. "Come in," Walter called, his voice impressively steady. James Morrison opened the door, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp as they took in the scene. Walter by the windows, Ava at the conference table, both of them slightly flushed and breathing just a little too carefully. "Sorry to interrupt," James said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "Walter, I need to speak with you about the quarterly budget reports." "Ava, I'll catch up with you later about the Henderson replacement account." "Of course," Ava managed, clutching her files like a lifeline. "I should get back to my desk anyway." As she walked past James, she caught the speculative look in his eyes and felt her stomach drop. How much had he seen? How much had he guessed? The rest of the day passed in a haze of nervous energy. Every time her phone rang, every time someone knocked on her office door, Ava expected to be called into HR or summoned to explain herself to the board of directors. When 5:30 finally arrived, she practically ran to her car. Walter texted her an hour later, "My place. We need to talk." He opened the door before she could knock, pulling her inside and into his arms in one fluid motion. For a moment, they just held each other, and Ava let herself absorb his warmth, his strength, the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "We have a problem," Walter said quietly. "James saw us. James saw us. And even if he didn't see anything specific, he's suspicious. I could tell by the way he looked at me for the rest of the afternoon." Walter pulled back to meet her eyes. "Ava, if this gets out before we're ready to handle it..." "I know." She'd been thinking about nothing else since the moment James walked into that conference room. "My career would be over. Everyone would assume I slept my way into my position, that every promotion I've earned was because of you. That's not. It is, though. You know it is. Ava moved to the window, looking out at the city lights without really seeing them. Maybe we need to step back, take some time to think about this rationally. The silence behind her stretched so long that she finally turned around. Walter was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Is that what you want? He asked finally. To step back? I want to be realistic about what we're facing. That's not what I asked. Walter moved toward her, his eyes never leaving her face. Do you want to step back, Ava? Do you want to pretend the last 3 weeks never happened and go back to being just your boss and his employee? The thought of it, of losing this connection, this love that had changed everything about how she saw the world, made her chest ache with genuine pain. No, she whispered. I don't want that. Then we fight for this. We figure out how to make it work, how to protect both our careers and our relationship. Walter reached for her hands, threading their fingers together. I won't ask you to sacrifice everything for me, but I won't give up on us without a fight either. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time to stop hiding. Maybe it's time to make this official, with HR, with the board, with anyone who needs to know. Walter's voice was steady, certain. I'm saying I love you enough to risk everything, and I hope you feel the same way. Ava looked into his eyes, those storm blue eyes that had captivated her from the very first moment, and saw her future reflected there. Not just the fantasy of stolen moments and secret meetings, but something real and lasting and worth fighting for. I do feel the same way, she said. But Walter, if we do this, if we make it official, there's no going back. Everything changes. Everything already changed the moment I fell in love with you. Walter brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. The question is, are we brave enough to let the rest of the world catch up? As Ava looked at him, this man who had turned her carefully ordered world upside down in the most beautiful way possible, she realized she was done being afraid, done hiding, done pretending that what they had was anything less than extraordinary. Yes, she said. Yes, we are. But being brave and being prepared for the consequences were two very different things. The emergency board meeting was called for 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. Walter had texted Ava at 6. It's happening. James went to the board. I love you. Now, sitting in the pristine boardroom on the 32nd floor, surrounded by 12 stern faces in expensive suits, Ava felt remarkably calm. She'd worn her favorite navy dress, the one that made her feel powerful and confident, and the compass necklace Walter had given her. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it as anything less than her truest self. Ms. Collins, board chair Margaret Hayes began, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched her expression. I'm sure you understand why you've been asked here today. I do. Ava's voice was steady, clear. She'd practiced this moment in her mind 100 times over the past week. You're concerned about my personal relationship with Mr. Koch. A ripple of murmurs went around the table. James Morrison sat at the far end, looking uncomfortable but resolute. Walter was at the head of the table, his face a mask of professional composure, but she could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. Concerned is one way to put it, said board member Robert Blake, his tone disapproving. Ms. Collins, you've been with this company for 3 years. Your work has been exemplary, which makes this situation all the more disappointing. What situation would that be exactly? Ava asked, keeping her voice level despite the anger building in her chest. The situation, Margaret interjected, where one of our senior employees has engaged in an inappropriate relationship with her direct supervisor, potentially compromising the integrity of our workplace and putting the company at legal risk. I see. Ava straightened in her chair, feeling the weight of the compass against her collarbone. And what makes this relationship inappropriate? Another murmur around the table. Margaret's eyebrows rose. Ms. Collins, surely you understand the power dynamics at play here, the potential for favoritism, for conflicts of interest. I understand power dynamics very well, Ava said, her voice gaining strength. I understand them as a black woman who has had to work twice as hard for every opportunity I've been given. I understand them as someone who has earned every promotion, every accolade, every success through merit and dedication. She stood, placing her hands flat on the polished table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. What I don't understand is how a consensual relationship between two adults who respect and care for each other suddenly invalidates 3 years of excellent work performance. Ms. Collins, Robert began, I'm not finished. The authority in her voice surprised even her. You want to talk about integrity? Let's talk about integrity. 6 weeks ago, Daniel Henderson sexually harassed me during a client meeting. He made inappropriate comments, touched me without permission, and made it clear that his interest in signing with our company was contingent on his access to me personally. Walter's jaw clenched, but he remained silent. They'd agreed he would let her speak first. When I reported this to Mr. Koch, Ava continued, he didn't hesitate. He didn't ask me to handle it quietly or suggest I was overreacting. He immediately moved to terminate our business relationship with Henderson, sacrificing a 7-figure contract to protect my safety and dignity. She paused, letting that sink in. That's the kind of man you're suggesting I shouldn't be involved with. A man who puts human decency above profit margins. That's not the point, Margaret started. Isn't it? Ava's voice rose slightly. Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like the point is that you're more comfortable with a client who sees women as objects than you are with an employee who sees me as an equal. The room fell silent. Ava could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 12 pairs of eyes assessing her. This was it, the moment where she either saved her career or destroyed it completely. You want to know about our relationship? She said, her voice softer now, but no less determined. Walter Koch is the first man I've ever met who challenges me intellectually while supporting me emotionally. He's someone who listens when I speak, who values my opinions, who never once made me feel like I had to choose between being professional and being myself. She looked directly at Walter, seeing the love and pride shining in his eyes despite the formal setting. He's someone who makes me want to be the best version of myself, not because he demands it, but because he believes I already am. And yes, I'm in love with him, completely, unapologetically in love with him. Another pause, another breath. If that makes me unprofessional in your eyes, then I question what kind of professionals you think we should be. Because the way I see it, having someone in your life who brings out your best qualities, who supports your growth, who makes you happier and more fulfilled, that makes you better at everything you do, including your job. Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying Ava with new interest. And what about the appearance of impropriety? The questions this raises about favoritism. What favoritism? Ava asked. I haven't received any special treatment, any unearned promotions, any preferential assignments. My work speaks for itself, as it always has. If anything, I've been more careful, more diligent, more determined to prove that my personal life doesn't interfere with my professional obligations. She turned to address the full board. You have my complete work history, my performance reviews, my client feedback, my project outcomes. Judge me on that, not on who I choose to love in my personal time. Walter cleared his throat and all eyes turned to him. If I may, he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had first attracted Ava to him. Miss Collins has said everything I could hope to say about the quality of her character and work, but I'd like to add something about mine. He stood, moving to stand beside Ava, a show of unity that wasn't lost on anyone in the room. I took this position because I believed in what this company could become, a place where innovation and humanity could coexist, where we could build something meaningful while treating each other with dignity and respect. His hand briefly touched Ava's back, a gesture of support that was subtle but unmistakable. Ava Collins embodies everything I hope to find here. She's brilliant, dedicated, ethical, and kind. She makes everyone around her better, including me. And yes, I'm in love with her. I'm not ashamed of that, and I won't apologize for it. Walter's gaze swept the room. If this board believes that love, real, honest, committed love, is somehow incompatible with professional excellence, then perhaps I'm not the right leader for this company after all. The silence that followed was deafening. Ava felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the board members exchange glances, whispered conversations, meaningful looks. Finally, Margaret spoke. Mr. Koch, Ms. Collins, please step outside while we deliberate. In the hallway, Ava's composure finally cracked. She leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly shaky. Did we just commit career suicide? Walter pulled her into his arms, not caring who might see them. If we did it together, and with dignity. Walter, if they fire you because of me, then they were never worthy of either of us. He tilted her chin up, meeting her eyes. Ava, I meant every word I said in there. You're worth any risk, any consequence. I'd rather flip burgers with you than run a company that doesn't value what we have. Before she could respond, the boardroom door opened. Margaret appeared, her expression unreadable. Please come back in. They returned to their seats, hands briefly touching under the table for strength. Margaret stood at the head of the room, looking every inch the formidable executive she was. "The board has reached a decision," she announced. "Ms. Collins, your work record is indeed exemplary. Your passion and eloquence today only reinforce what we already knew about your character and capabilities." Ava held her breath. "However," Margaret continued, "this situation does require some adjustments to maintain proper governance and avoid any appearance of impropriety." Here it comes, Ava thought. The conditions, the ultimatums, the impossible choices. "Effective immediately, Ms. Collins will report directly to the board for all performance reviews and promotion considerations, rather than to Mr. Koch. This ensures that your professional advancement continues to be based solely on merit." Ava blinked, hardly daring to hope. "Additionally," Margaret said, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth, "we expect both of you to complete the company's conflict of interest disclosure forms and attend a brief training session on workplace relationships." That's it?" Ava managed. "That's it," Margaret confirmed. "Ms. Collins, Mr. Koch, you've both demonstrated that it's possible to maintain professional integrity while honoring personal truth. We respect that, and we respect you." The relief was so overwhelming that Ava felt dizzy. Walter's hand found hers under the table, squeezing tightly. "There is one more thing," Margaret added, and Ava's heart clenched again. "The company will be making a donation to a women's workplace safety organization, and we'll be reviewing all our client relationship protocols to ensure no employee ever has to endure what Ms. Collins experienced with the Henderson account." As they left the boardroom an hour later, after signing forms and shaking hands and accepting congratulations, Ava felt like she was floating. In the elevator, Walter pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "We did it," he murmured against her hair. "We actually did it. I can't believe they let us stay." "I can." Walter pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright with love and admiration. "You were magnificent in there, Ava. Absolutely magnificent." When the elevator doors opened on their floor, they stepped out together, no longer hiding, no longer pretending, no longer afraid. Their colleagues would know soon enough, but for now, it was enough to walk side by side, hands briefly touching, hearts completely intertwined. "So," Walter said as they approached their respective offices, "dinner tonight? We can celebrate not getting fired." "Your place or mine?" Ava asked, marveling at how normal the question felt, how right. "Ours," Walter said with a smile that made her knees weak. Eventually, love had tested them, challenged them, demanded they choose between safety and truth. They'd chosen truth, and somehow, miraculously, the world had chosen them back. 1 year later, the charity gala was everything Ava had hoped it would be. Elegant without being stuffy, meaningful without being heavy-handed. String lights twinkled overhead in the hotel ballroom, and the soft jazz quartet in the corner provided the perfect soundtrack for an evening dedicated to workplace safety and women's empowerment. "You clean up nice, Ms. Collins," Walter murmured in her ear as they stood near the silent auction tables, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. Ava turned to smile at him, still amazed after all these months that she could do so freely, without looking over her shoulder or worrying about who might see. "You don't look bad yourself, Mr. Koch." He was devastating in his black tuxedo, but it was the way he looked at her, like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, that made her pulse quicken. Some things never changed. "I can't believe we pulled this off," she said, gesturing around the room filled with TechFlow employees, clients, and supporters. The gala had been her idea, born from Margaret Hayes' promise to support workplace safety initiatives. What had started as a simple fundraiser had grown into an annual event that had already raised over $200,000. "You pulled this off," Walter corrected. "I just wrote the checks and tried to stay out of your way. We make a good team, the best." His thumb traced a small circle against her back, a gesture that still sent shivers down her spine. "Dance with me? I thought you'd never ask." The dance floor was crowded, but as Walter pulled her into his arms, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. They moved together with the easy synchronicity of two people who had learned each other's rhythms, who fit together as naturally as breathing. "Remember the last time we danced?" Walter asked, spinning her gently before drawing her back against his chest. "Jasmine's wedding. You were mysterious and charming, and I was convinced I'd never see you again. Best 3 minutes of my life, until the next dance and the one after that and every dance since." Ava laughed, the sound bubbling up from pure happiness. "You're incorrigible. I'm in love. There's a difference." Around them other couples swayed to the music, colleagues, friends, people whose lives had been touched by the work they were celebrating tonight. Mia danced nearby with her new boyfriend, catching Ava's eye and giving her a thumbs up. James Morrison was at the bar, looking relaxed and happy for the first time since becoming the interim head of account management when Ava had been promoted to Director of Strategic Development. "Penny for your thoughts," Walter said, noticing her distraction. "Just thinking about how much has changed. A year ago I was terrified of taking any risks. Now look at us." "Now look at us," Walter agreed, his voice soft with wonder. "Living openly, working together, building something beautiful." It had been beautiful. The months following their board meeting had brought challenges, whispered conversations that stopped when they entered rooms, a few clients who questioned the company's progressive policies, the occasional doubt about whether they were making the right choices. But for every obstacle, there had been twice as many victories. Colleagues who supported them, clients who respected their honesty, and work that felt more meaningful because they could pursue it together. "There's something I want to tell you," Walter said as the song began to wind down. "Here now?" Ava looked around at the crowded dance floor. "Can't it wait until we get home?" "It could, but I don't want it to." Walter's hand stilled on her waist, and when she looked up at him, his expression was serious, nervous, hopeful all at once. "Ava, this past year has been the best of my life. Not just because of what we've built professionally, but because of who I get to be when I'm with you." "Walter, let me finish." He took a deep breath, and Ava suddenly became aware that the music had stopped, that people around them were beginning to notice their conversation. "You make me want to be worthy of you every single day. You challenge me, support me, inspire me. You make me laugh when I take myself too seriously, and you believe in me even when I don't believe in myself." "I love you too," Ava whispered, her heart beginning to race as she started to suspect where this was heading. "I know you do, and I love you completely forever with everything I have." Walter's voice carried across the dance floor now, clear and strong and utterly certain. "Which is why I want to spend the rest of my life showing you exactly how much." He was moving then, dropping to one knee right there in the middle of the dance floor, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. The room went quiet around them, but Ava only had eyes for Walter, for the man who had changed everything about how she saw love, how she saw herself, how she saw the future. "Ava Collins," he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning vintage ring with a center diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light like stars. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, the only sound in the ballroom was Ava's sharp intake of breath. Then from somewhere behind her she heard Mia's voice. "Say yes, you beautiful fool." The laughter that rippled through the crowd broke the spell, and Ava found her voice. "Yes," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, yes, absolutely, yes." The room erupted in applause as Walter slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. When he stood and kissed her, it was with the kind of joy that was impossible to contain, the kind of love that made everything else, the obstacles they'd overcome, the fears they'd conquered, the future they were building, feel like destiny. "I love you," Ava whispered against his lips as the cheering continued around them. "I love you too, forever." Later, after the congratulations and champagne toasts, after the party wound down and they found themselves alone on the hotel's rooftop terrace, Ava leaned against Walter's chest and looked out at the city lights spread below them. "So," she said, playing with her new ring, marveling at how perfectly it fit. "When did you know? When did you decide you wanted to marry me?" Walter was quiet for a moment, his arms tightening around her. "Honestly, I think I knew that first night when you took my hand and let me lead you onto the dance floor. There was something about the way you looked at me, like you saw exactly who I was and weren't afraid of it." "I was terrified," Ava admitted, "of you, of what I was feeling, of how much you made me want things I'd convinced myself I didn't need. And now? Now I know that the best things in life are worth being terrified for." She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had become her everything. "Now I know that love isn't about finding someone safe. It's about finding someone worth taking risks for." "Speaking of risks," Walter said with a smile that made her stomach flutter, "I have a confession to make." "Oh no, what did you do?" "I may have already talked to your father." Ava's eyes widened. "Walter Koch, did you ask my father for permission to marry me?" "I asked for his blessing. There's a difference." Walter's expression was sheepish but unrepentant. "I called him 3 weeks ago, told him how much I love you, how I want to spend my life making you happy, how I promise to always support your dreams and never try to dim your light." And what did he say? He said he'd been waiting for someone good enough for his daughter for 29 years, and he was glad I finally showed up. Walter's smile grew soft, loving. Then he told me some very embarrassing stories about your childhood that I'm definitely going to use against you later. Ava laughed, the sound floating out over the city night. I can't believe you called my father. I wanted to do this right. All of it. The proposal, the ring, the future we're building together. Walter cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. You deserve everything, Ava. Every romantic gesture, every careful plan, every moment of being cherished exactly the way you are. As he kissed her again under the stars, Ava thought about the woman she'd been a year ago. Careful, guarded, convinced that safety was more important than happiness. That woman would never have believed that she could have this. A love that was both passionate and stable, a partner who challenged and supported her, a future that felt like an adventure rather than a plan. But life had taught her that the best stories weren't the ones you wrote in advance. They were the ones that surprised you, that asked you to be braver than you thought you could be, that rewarded you for taking chances on the impossible. And as she danced with her fiancé under the San Francisco sky, surrounded by the lights of a city that had given them everything, Ava Collins knew with absolute certainty that her story was just beginning. Because sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, the person you're meant to love finds you exactly when you need them most. And sometimes, just sometimes, love really is enough to overcome everything else. Even when that love starts with just 3 minutes on a dance floor and a stranger who asks you to take a chance. The end. Would you take the same leap of faith for love that Ava and Walter did? Sometimes the greatest risks lead to the most beautiful rewards. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.